Testament Greek, in quotation marks, at Calvary Chapel of Southeastern Connecticut. That's right. You've joined us on a very special night because we're going to be going over liquid future verbs. And they're very, very special. So, anyway, we are covering 2 chapters today. Today is,
The last 2 chapters in?
no, but close. But close. I will say which chapters we're going over. We are doing chapters 20 and 21. Yes, 20 and 21. We're really moving along.
So can we
think
just
there's
do
like-
one chapter today then?
No. But that was a great question. That was a good question. Because I think there's like 35 chapters of content
Yeah, but
or
it
something?
feels like the middle of the book.
Oh, that's because there's so many charts and indices and all that good stuff in the back. So, yep, 36 is the last chapter with like actual content. So, I mean, we're approaching 2/3 of the way through the textbook. Today, we're going to cover 2 chapters. Next class, we're going to cover 2 chapters, and then the class after that as well. From that point forward, it's just 1 chapter per class, which will be nice. And it will give us an opportunity to reinforce everything. Don't need that yet. Just don't want to, sometimes you can pull it too high and it pops out. That would be awful. So I don't want that to occur. And it did. So, chapter 20. Okay. So, what is up with chapter 20? It's titled Verbal Roots and Other Forms of the Future. Basically, what you need to know is that there are certain times when some of the spelling changes based upon actual rules that follow patterns. Think of it kind of like the contract verb, right? So when you're looking at the present active indicative paradigm, basically the main paradigm for the contract verb poieto, right? So it'd be poio, poies, poie, all that good stuff. If you were looking at that paradigm on side of the luo paradigm, the first one that you learned, when you're comparing them, you see that poieto and its conjugation there for the present active indicative, it's not irregular. It's just that the stem happens to end in a vowel, in an epsilon, and so there's a little bit of contraction that occurs. So, poieto is not irregular. It follows a pattern that can be described and classified, and is so in your workbook, but it's still not that much different than the luo paradigm. Most of those endings are exactly the same, right? When you're comparing them. So that happens to some degree with certain words, particularly in the future tense. And so he goes over some of those in this chapter. And mostly it's the liquid verbs that we're concerned with. And I will explain to you what they are, how to identify them, what happens with a liquid verb. So, go to page 170. So, on page 170, you can see in big bold letters, pattern 1, root not modified. Okay? Remember we're talking about roots and stems and things like that. It's basically, and I don't want to get too technical concerning this, but just remember that stuff, it's the main chunk of the word that you add endings onto and stuff. Think of it like that. So, pattern 1, he gives us 4 patterns. To be honest, like when I did this the first time, I didn't memorize like, oh, these are the 4 patterns, and no, that's not really necessary. You just need to be able to recognize the changes that will occur and not like whether they're pattern 1, 2, 3, or 4. So, the root not modified, we have verbs like, you see akuo, poieo, and blepo there. So akuo is just your normal stem or root not changing verb, okay? You just slap those endings on that you learned. Poieo is technically the same, it's just that there will be some contraction that occurs because of that stem ending in the epsilon. And blepo, well, why is blepo listed on there? Is there really any change? It's because it ends in a consonant that's a stop, right? Like the P. So when you add the sigma for the future tense, it becomes a psi, right? So that stuff follows the pattern, and you have learned it. So, pattern 2. Sometimes a verb will have just a completely different root in a certain tense. So sometimes when you're looking at the present tense and you go to the future, it looks like a completely different word. But it's not, it's actually the same word because the stem changes. So when you're looking at the list that they have, you see erkamai, right? Erkamai means what?
Come.
To come or to go, right? Very, very common word. Actually, these 3 that he gives you right here, erkamai, legon, horao, I would strongly recommend that on those 3, you memorize the principal parts very quickly, because those 3 words are very, very common in narrative. They mean to come, to go, to see, to speak or to say, and to see. So, and they're all just a little irregular. So, back to erhamai. Well, erhamai, if it were normal, or if it were a normal future, what would I do to make this future? Normally.
You add omega?
Well, to make it future. This is amai in the lexical form because it's deponent. Remember, it has a middle passive ending, but it's translated as active.
Sigma.
Yeah, you stick that sigma. Where would I put it, probably?
Before the O, I did not.
Yes. True that. Ding, ding, ding. Put sigma. Ericsamai. Let me tell you, that wouldn't stand. There would be some change. Well, that would actually switch to a xi.
Okay.
But the thing is, like that's what would normally occur, and then that would switch to a xi. But for pattern 2 verbs, they just have a different root altogether. So look, instead of erchamai, it's and then smush those. And Elusamai.
Epsilon, epsilon.
And then it would just decline, just like the future normally does. Okay? Elusamai, elusei, elusatai, elusamatha, that sort of stuff. See the next one? Lego. But then Lego in the future is not legso, which would switch the gamma and the sigma would become a xi, lexo. No, it just has a different root. It's ero. Okay? Now, I do know some things about root changes as to like possibly why they occur for some of the words, but I'm not going to talk about it right now because I don't think it's going to be helpful. But just know, some of these that have really drastic changes, there are reasons for it. But, okay, then you see hora'o. Well, hora'o in the future is apsamai. Okay? That word, hora'o, is a normal verb, but it's a contract verb. But in the future, it switches to deponent. That happens with a few of the common verbs as well, like lambano does that. So, anyway, different roots. Okay, he gives you 3 examples. The only way that you're going to know that it has a different root is if you memorize it. So that's why that's why the future active indicative is the second principal part. When you're looking in your lexical entry, you have your word, right, like Lego, and then underneath it, you might have something in parentheses. If you do, that's the imperfect, but the next one is the future active indicative. The reason why the future active indicative is one of the principal parts is because sometimes the verb changes its root in the future. And you couldn't know that unless you've memorized the principal part. So if you know a verb, let's say you have there are so many verbs. What to choose? I mean, I guess we could do pistuo. If you wanted to make that future, but you didn't have the principal parts memorized, but you know pistuo, you know it means to believe, you know it's a verb, what would you guess to make it future?
Sigma.
Well, where? How would you spell it? Or you could just pronounce it.
Pet. Pistuso.
Yep, you're going to put that sigma right before the omega. Pistuso. Because that's the tense formative, is that sigma that lets you know. So that's what you're going to guess. But just know that if you haven't memorized all the principal parts of a verb, you only know the present tense, and you have to make the future for some reason, you are technically guessing. Because it could just have a completely different stem. I will say the vast majority of the time, they follow the normal pattern of sticking a sigma in there. But just know that there's a possibility of a stem change, and you can only know that if you memorize the principal parts. Yes?
So you add the sigma y anytime you see, like, for each verb that is there, where would you know where to add the sigma?
Oh, you just look at the chapter we went over last week, the future active indicative,
Yeah.
it has a tense formative. If you look on page 159, and there's a sigma that comes into play. So he has a little chart, like maybe a third of the way down, 19.8, that shows you that for luo, the stem lu, plus the sigma, plus the connecting vowel, plus the personal ending. But that shows you where the tense formative goes. And then if you look at the paradigm at the bottom, you see on the left-hand column the future paradigm, and it's compared on the right to the present paradigm.
Yeah.
So you see that right after the stem is that sigma is inserted.
Okay, alright.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
So
I have a question.
yes,
What was my question? Principal part, is that past, present, future?
there's 6 principal parts. The first one is the present active indicative, the lexical form. And then when you're looking at the lexical entry, like in the back of the book or on your flashcard, underneath it, there might be something in parentheses, but I'll leave that out for now. The first one that's underneath the main lexical entry is the future active indicative. And then there's the aorist active indicative. Then you have the perfect active indicative, the perfect passive, or excuse me, perfect middle passive indicative, and then the aorist passive. The reason why those are all the principal parts is because technically those different tenses could have an unpredictable change. Okay? Like for instance, for the future, a lot of this doesn't make as much sense because we haven't gone through the other tenses yet, but for all of the tenses, there are predictable changes, okay? Like the future. You can predict that a sigma will come in after the stem. And the vast majority of the time, you're going to be right. So, if you know that the present tense is, laleo, and you know that the future takes the sigma, you can predict that it would be laleso. It's not laleso, it's laleso because it's contract.
Okay.
All right, so there's a lengthening there. But, and then if you see another verb, whatever it happens to be, you can predict what it will look like, what the spelling will be, because you know about that tense formative in the future. But sometimes the word will completely change or just make a change you didn't expect. Lambano. You've probably learned lambano by now, right? Anybody? It's
I had the words up, vocab words up to chapter 20 last night. I didn't hear that in there.
lambano. Okay. Well, you will soon. It's very, very common. Lambano is chapter 22. So for next class, lambano means to take or to receive. Okay. All right, I got it. So this is the lexical form, right? Now, from what you know currently, if you wanted to make that a future, how would you do it? Like, what would it look like? How would you say it?
It'd be lambaso.
Lam what?
Lambaso, because the new would go away, right?
Well, you're on the right track, but no. Technically, this would be a liquid verb, which we're about to talk about. So actually, the sigma would drop off and there would be a circumflex to notify you of that. But technically, I haven't said that yet, so let's pretend you don't know that. Okay?
Because I really don't.
Then don't pretend. Just act natural. Okay. So, you would expect, knowing what you know right now, something like this, okay? Well, what is the future active indicative first singular from Lombano? It's actually
Lamp samai.
it's actually lampsamai.
Lamps.
Okay. Now here, so what happened here? Well, amai instead of oh. Okay, so it switched to deponent in the future. That happens with, I don't know, probably like 5 words you're going to memorize in this book. So I mean, that's not really a huge deal. I'm just guessing. It's probably not more than 5.
Yeah, everything that ends with the omega and that ending right there is a deponent, right?
This one,
Right.
if
All those four letters is a deponent every time, isn't it? When it ends
okay, this is a middle passive ending, but some words have middle passive endings but are translated in an active sense. That is a deponent when that happens.
with-
So lampsamai is from Lombano. It's the future, but it's not Lambanzo, is it? No. And could you have predicted that? No, you couldn't have. Therefore, the future active indicative is a principal part, because every once in a while, a verb will have a wacky future tense that you couldn't have predicted. So that's why the principal parts are there.
Okay.
So that's a good example of that. And sometimes that happens with the aorist, sometimes it happens with the perfect. That form of the word is just wacky. It doesn't follow the rules that you learn. Therefore, you have to memorize it.
So
But-
those principal parts are just those things underneath a verb in the lexicon
Yes.
that
Yep.
just say the other tenses.
Yes.
Principal parts.
The reason why it's those particular tenses and voices, is because you could say, well, why is the future active indicative a principal part and not the future passive indicative? Why is the future passive not a principal part? And the reason is because the principal parts are the ones that if you know them and you know the patterns for the verbs, like you know the tense formatives, then you can predict any form that verb might show up in. Okay? Because those 6 principal parts cover all the possible irregularities.
Okay.
If they're gonna have an irregularity,
If-
it's gonna show up on one of those.
Exactly.
Okay.
If they had, and a lot of them don't. A lot of them just follow the
I like
patterns.
those.
That's right. All those other ones, why don't we just not learn them or say them or read them? Right? Someone needs to create a new Greek Bible and use synonyms for all those tough words that follow regular patterns.
Biblical Greek for dummies. I'm
Yeah.
buying the book.
That's exactly right. I was buying it too.
Someone needs to just translate the thing and we can read it in English.
Isn't that what we have for a book?
Yeah.
It's fun here. Wait a minute. Come on.
I'm good at figuring out the English one.
Yeah.
Okay, so look at pattern number 3, liquid futures. I don't know about you, I'm a little thirsty right now.
Oh yeah.
Hmm?
And some water.
Oh, well, thank you. I was planning on waiting for the break. It's kind of like an incentive to pull through, you know?
Pattern
You don't
number
just
2.
quit.
That's right, because it's so difficult.
1, 2, and 3.
Pattern 3, we're on page 171, liquid futures. So this is the point of a liquid future, is if you have a verb and its stem in the future tense ends in one of 4 consonants, then the tense formative sigma won't stand next to it, it'll drop out. And you'll have a circumflex to notify you. And sometimes a iota comes in to the stem. We're gonna look at the paradigm. So some funky stuff happens, okay? Now, or excuse me, no, the iota That's in the aorist. Just kidding. Excuse me. So, if you have a stem that ends in a mu, nu, why do I do it? I guess I should do, I'm trying to think, like, should I do it alphabetically or,
Lambda.
I guess I'll do it alphabetically. Okay. These 4 letters, lambda, mu, nu, rho. And how do you remember them? Does he?
LMNOP.
Or does he not give you the little mnemonic device here? Maybe just Armstrong said this when I took this class a while ago. We have 4 English words that all rhyme that begin with these letters. Lice, mice, nice, rice. Lice, mice, nice, rice. Rice, nice, mice, lice. You can just say it in whatever order you want. But those will help you remember the 4 letters. Lice, mice, nice, rice. So, rice begins with an R. Obviously that looks like a P, but it's a R, you know. Same letter, right? Lice, mice, nice, and rice could be all things that, well, the nice part messes everything up, doesn't it? I'm going to say all things that you don't want in your hair, or that, but the nice doesn't fit.
Well, even if they're nice lice, I still don't want them in my hair.
It's not nice
True.
to have lice or mice in your rice.
That's right. It's not nice to have lice or mice in your rice. So that could be, I don't know, Dan, senior quote?
Senior quote.
What do you think?
I think I'll consider my options.
Okay, well this is obviously your only viable option
Okay.
because all the other ones stink. But think about it. So, when your stem ends in one of those, you have a little bit of droppage from your, concerning your sigma. Go ahead and flip to the next page.
Paradigms.
So, looking, you have meno there. Meno is kind of a cool, cool verb. It's, you know, all the abiding going on in John. Abide in me, all that good stuff. That's meno. The basic sense of it is to remain or to stay, that sort of stuff. But it's translated abide a lot. So, especially maybe if we're doing a little 1 John after this, maybe diving in there, you'll see the word meno quite a bit. You'll get very used to it. So, meno, menes, mene, menumen, meneta, menusin. What's going on there? These look like what tense?
Present active, they do.
They look like present tense. No!
For the
How?
over.
They look just like a present to me. But how would I know that they're actually future?
Circumflex.
It's the circumflex.
That's it.
Yes, because when the sigma drops out, the circumflex comes. It's like, it's alright guys, I got this vowel covered. Okay, that's basically what it does.
Circle the circle.
That circumflex, definitely looking out for us.
So that always means future.
The circumflex? No.
Anyway,
Because,
we learned about circumflex even before, for deponent
I'm
verbs.
just talking about for this.
well, not for
I know.
deponent, but for
Contract verbs.
contract
Sorry, I'm
verbs.
sorry.
Remember, contract verbs, the stem ends in alpha, epsilon, or omicron. And so he actually gives you a present contract verb in this paradigm, just to compare it. So, poieo, let's say third person singular from poieo would be poiei with a circumflex, because the epsilon on the end of the stem dropped out, right?
Right.
There was the contraction. But you might see poiei, and, but then you're thinking, like, there's the circumflex on poiei, but contract verbs have a circumflex in the future without the sigma, because the sigma dropped it. How do I know what this is? Poiei, is it present, or is it a contract, is it a contract verb in the present, or is it a liquid verb in the future? How do I know? So how can you tell? How will you ever be able to find out?
I don't know, because they both have the circumflex now.
But let's think about other things concerning either verb. What are other things that we know? Like, what makes something a contract verb? What makes something a liquid verb?
Mice, rice, lice. Nice.
So that's one thing that we could do. We could ask ourselves, poiei, does its stem end in lice, mice, nice, rice? Does poiei even, are there even any of those letters in the word? No. Therefore, can it be a liquid future? It can't, because a liquid future has a stem that ends in one of these four letters.
The very last letter in the stem?
Poiei, what's the stem here?
Boy.
Yeah, you got to drop off the personal ending, right? Psh. So, a iota? Nope. Yoda's not in there. So it's not even possible for this bad boy to be a liquid future. So therefore, that only leaves you with a contract. The other thing, too, is think about your lexical forms. Because if you have these words memorized, if you see poiei, you have it memorized, go ahead and say the lexical form.
Boy.
Poyo.
Yeah, boy.
No, not poyo. Not poyo. You're missing a letter.
Poieo.
Poieo, right?
Yeah.
One thing is when you're going over your vocab, say them out loud too. That helps too, to kind of drill what they sound like. Poieo, if you have the lexical form memorized, you say poio, that's from poieo. Just think about the lexical form. Poieo.
Do make, or does it?
Yeah, it means to do or to make. Poieo, you drop off the personal ending, what's it end in?
Epsilon.
Epsilon, it's a contract verb, right? Alpha, epsilon, omicron. If the stem ends in one of those three, it's contract. So that's another way that you can tell.
So I haven't memorized that yet, I need to.
And you can at least, when you're thinking of poieo, okay, the stem ends in an epsilon, but it certainly doesn't end in a lambda, mu, nu, or rho.
So this is just present we're talking about, that alpha, epsilon.
Yeah, that's for that just makes it doesn't matter whether it's present. Well, it's the lexical form. If the lexical form, if the stem of the lexical form ends in one of those three, then it makes it a contract verb.
Okay.
Okay, so the liquid future verb has to end in lambda, mu, nu.
The stem.
Right.
And so if you're looking at the lexical form, of a word, how would you find out what its stem ends in? Like if you had,
You drop the ending.
well, yes, let me, how would you figure out what the stem is. What do you do to determine a stem? Because this is the lexical form.
Right.
So we're trying to say, hey, what is this? Is this would this be a liquid if it were in the future? How can we find, then we need to know what the stem ends in. So what do you do to find out what the stem ends in when you're looking at the lexical form? You just drop the personal ending. So the personal ending is the omega, right?
For the first person, whatever.
Yep, the first person singular, which also happens to be the lexical form.
Right, and that ends in an alpha, so that is contract.
It's a contract, yes, but it wouldn't be a liquid in the future
No.
because it's not lice, mice, nice rice. You know, what if you, okay, what about this? What would you do to find out the stem when you're looking at the lexical form?
Just drop off.
Drop the omega. Would this be a liquid when it's in the future? No, it wouldn't, because the stem ends in a gamma, not one of these four. Okay, so yeah, when you're looking down the paradigm here in 20.12, you see those are all your normal endings that you would have for the present, right? It's just that sigma dropped out and you have a circumflex instead. So that's how you would be able to tell the difference between, like, if you saw menusin, how would how would you tell? Well, you can see in the left-hand column there's a circumflex. That one's a future. Look all the way to the right. That's the present tense, menusin. There's no circumflex. Now, jumping down to the future middle, you see that basically the same principles apply. The only difference is when you get into the plurals, there's a little bit of, there's an extra letter that comes in. So you see, like, the first person plural for meno, when it's in that left-hand column, which is the future, it's menumetha, right? Menumetha. Jump over to the right-hand column, which is the present, menametha. What's nice there is the spelling actually does change there. So you'll recognize that there's a difference there. Spelling wise. Alrighty. You also have, if you keep moving to page 173, there are some minor spelling changes that occur with certain words, like let's say if they have a double consonant. You see apostello, that it's to the right of addition of double consonant. Apostello is present, but when it goes into the future, it's apostello, and you see one of the lambdas dropped out. But it still ends in lice, right? Lice, mice, nice, rice. The stem ends in a lambda, so the sigma drops out and there's a circumflex. He's just letting you know, hey, one of the lambdas dropped off too. That's still, you know what I mean? Like, that's not that tricky. It still looks basically like the same exact word. So, some there's an some there is a iota drops out on the next one, and different roots.
Question.
Yes.
On the paradigm that's labeled 20.14,
Yes.
it says that there's a present liquid on the last column. Can you explain that to me?
Oh, that's just the present form. Excuse me, that's just the present tense from Meno. It says liquid just because it's still, you can still consider it a liquid verb no matter what tense it is in. It's, you know what I'm saying? So we are calling these.
Why isn't it the same as the one right above it then?
Oh, because 20.14 is in the middle voice, but 2012 is in the active voice.
Okay.
Right? So when you're looking at Meno, upper right hand corner of the top paradigm,
Yeah.
Meno means I remain.
Uh-huh.
Now, if you drop down to Menamai, Menamai is going to be I
Well,
I'm going to.
am remained. See, that's not actually, this is not a very good verb to put in that.
Can't be I will
But-
remain.
Well, not, she's asking about the present
Right.
column.
yeah, I don't really
I am
understand
remaining.
that.
Oh, yeah.
The present, she's specifically talking about the present column. Remain is just a weird word to put in a middle or a passive.
But if it's
Um,
active, then what Patrick just said would work, right? I am remaining.
Yes, but for present. But we're actually in the middle passive for the second
Oh,
paradigm.
I thought you were still looking at the other one, present active.
Yeah, so, I,
And this is present. Middle.
let's say that the word means inhabit, which is a little bit of a stretch, but I'm sure people translated that in certain texts.
Okay.
Let's say that. The top one is going to be I inhabit
Okay.
for Meno. When you drop down to Menomai, it's I am inhabited. Or I inhabit myself,
Yeah.
if it were middle.
Okay.
So it's like a reflexive word.
If a middle voice is usually can be reflexive. Okay, let's look at the imperfect real quick. Flip to your next chapter. Okay, which is page 182 begins the chapter. What's nice about the imperfect is that we've already gone over the way that it translates. The imperfect is a past continuous verb. Okay? Give me an example of a past continuous verb in English.
I was running.
I was running. Yes. So, if it were just a regular past, it'd be I ran, right? But if you're in the past and the action is like ongoing right then, when in the past, you do it like that in English. I was, or you were, or he was, and then you add the ing on the verb, right? That's how we do it in English. So, yesterday I was sitting. All that sort of stuff. They were eating ice cream. These are all forms of the imperfect, and that's what you call that tense in Greek. So remember, in the present for Greek, you can translate a present as simple or continuous, right? It's not the same. That's not the same in the past. There are two distinct tenses. One is the imperfect, the past continuous, and then the other one is aorist, which we're going to do next class, which is just the simple past. So, yeah, look at that that paradigm. We'll write it out, and I'm looking at the paradigm on 184. First one, eluan. And then what's the next one?
LOS.
Elus. What's the next one? Eluen, right? And that's a movable new, right?
Yeah.
And we have what? Are you pronouncing all of the letters?
No, am I?
Eluamen, right? And next? Eluete. And what's the last one? Eluan. Okay. I mean, what do you notice right off the bat looking at that paradigm? What's significantly different from the other paradigms you've learned?
There's another letter in front.
Yes, exactly. The epsilon stuck on the front.
Okay.
So that's an augment. You can call that, it can also be called a prefix, right? And a prefix just means that it's like attached, it's fastened, it's fixed to it on the front or beforehand, right? Prefix. So prefix, but he refers to it most of the time, I think, as the augment. Yep, and particularly it's a temporal augment. What does the word temporal mean?
Only there for a small time. It's temporary.
Well, no, temporal is maybe in certain contexts, but it's a lot broader than that.
Sometimes.
Temporal, in general, just means that it pertains to time. Temporal is an adjective meaning pertaining to time, in general. So, this is a temporal augment. What that means is that this augment tells you something about the time, about the tense of the verb. The epsilon lets you know that it is a past tense verb. This is really, really nice because when you have an epsilon augmented onto a verb, you then know that the verb is either aorist or imperfect. It's one of the two, because both of those are past tense. So that's the first thing we noticed. So you might be asking yourself, well, what if the word just normally begins with an epsilon?
Yeah.
What in the world? Well, usually it will lengthen to like an eta, or maybe some of them do an epsilon iota. It depends, but there will still be a change in the front. It wouldn't surprise me though if maybe there's a few that don't change, like it just remains an epsilon, but most of them will lengthen if they already have an epsilon on the front.
Let me see.
Like, have you guys learned agero? Yeah, agero. That's one. Some words that. Well, agero is from chapter 20, so technically, he doesn't have an imperfect there. Look at on page 400. You see the fourth word down. Can someone pronounce that?
Gabriel.
The fourth word down? Yeah, remember it's a double gamma, so it's a gamma nasal. Well, it's a hard G, it's a G, N, G, and then remember with a zeta, if it doesn't start the word, you put a D sound in front of it, right? Engidzo. 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 So, engidzo, kind of a cool word. It means to draw near, to approach. When Jesus says, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand is a perfect form of engidzo. It literally, if you did it super literal, it would be for the kingdom of heaven has drawn near. But idiomatically, certain translations will say is at hand. Okay? So that word begins with an epsilon. And we're looking at the temporal augment on the front of the word, right?
Yeah.
So right underneath engidzo, the thing, the form that's in parentheses, that is the imperfect. So the imperfect has an epsilon on the front of it. Like if we, right, luo becomes eluon. So we drop the omega, we stick an on, right, for the personal ending,
Yeah.
and then we have the epsilon added to the front. So for engidzo, what would we do?
Well, you would expect it to be double epsilon, but you don't, right?
Well, double epsilon though, an epsilon with an epsilon, what might happen? Because we just talked about it. It might lengthen, right? So engidzo, when you add that epsilon, you drop this, and then you put in the omicron nu, what would we expect? We have a lengthened epsilon, goes to an eta, from an E to an A, and then we still have the double gamma, right? We have a iota, zeta, omicron, nu, right? Now, do you see how that's actually completely predictable? All you did, like you really didn't do much to that. You have your word, there's your stem in that tense, because you just take off the ending.
Yeah.
So you added your temporal augment, eta, eta plus eta, excuse me, epsilon plus epsilon equals eta. Yeah, Greek math. And you added the ending. So engidzon. That's, and an imperfect always follows the rules that it's supposed to. That's why it's not actually a principal part, because there aren't ever stem changes. He just likes to give you the imperfect just for extra info, which is nice. So, eluon, elus, eluen, eluamen, eluete, eluon. The other thing you have is, look, first person singular, third person plural are identical. That is nice. So, when you see those, you have to tell by context which one it is. And these endings, I mean, when you think about these endings, some of these endings are going to be used for the aorist that we'll get into next class. You have first aorist and second aorist. And second aorist uses these endings. So that's nice, because you're getting a lot of bang for your buck with this paradigm, right? You're getting to use it with another one as well. But we'll go over that then. But when you're looking at it, you know, what do you have to memorize? Like, what's different? Well, the first one's definitely different. This isn't like luo, you know, ends in an on. Okay. S, well, it's still ending in a sigma. Like luace, right? Still ending in that sigma. So there's some similarity there. Eluen, I'm trying to compare it to lue, the present. Definitely some difference there. These two, though, eluamen, eluete, your endings, right? Luamen, luete. So those, very, very easy to predict there. And then eluon, yeah, that's definitely different. But the nice thing is, it's the same as the first person singular. So, you know, let's go ahead and just run down these and translate them, and we'll take our break. So, eluon, let's translate it. Well, it's continuous, but it's past. That's the imperfect. I was loosing. All right, let's do the second one in unison.
You
Were loosing. He was loosing. We were loosing. Eluete is you were loosing. Eluan is they were loosing. It's true, they were. And okay, and there also is, I'm not going to write it up there, but look on the next page. he gives you also the imperfect middle passive. Because remember, this is active, but then in the imperfect, it's just like the present, where the middle and the passive are the same paradigm. So that's nice. So you have these endings, elu, amen, eluu, elueta, eluametha, elueste, eluanta. That's page 185. And so instead of I was loosing, eluamen is I was being loosed, right? So it's past tense. Past tense, it is continuous, but the subject is receiving the action of the verb instead of doing it. So I was being loosed, you were being loosed, he, she, it was being loosed, and so on. All right, let us take our 10-minute break.